a rematch of what was an underrated game last year. The North Carolina Tar Heels and the Minnesota Golden Gophers meet again for what should be a very intriguing matchup for two teams that we don't know a ton about heading into 2024. We're going to take a look at this game and break down what should we expect from these two teams. Now, this is a North Carolina team that finished 8-5 last year. They lose a really good quarterback, a top 5 quarterback in Drake May, so they're going to have to turn the ball over to one of their new quarterbacks. And Minnesota is also turning things over to their new quarterback, but for different reasons. Ethan Kaliakmanis just didn't get the job done, plain and simple. And now it's the Max Brosmer show. We'll see what he's capable of doing. We don't really know a ton about Minnesota because they didn't have a spring game. They haven't put out a ton that we know about for sure. I'm very intrigued to see what PJ Fleck has under his belt in his tools and what he can do to surprise a team like North Carolina. The Gophers finished 6-7. And right now, as I'm recording, the Gophers are a 2-point favorite. That is very surprising for me. A team that went 8-5, yes, lost some talent, especially their quarterback. The fact that a team that went 6-7 and was a team that was very inconsistent and struggled a lot at times is a 2-point favorite. Granted, it is at Minnesota, so that probably adds to that favor, but we'll see what happens with that. It's expected to be a lower scoring game, but the fact that Minnesota is favored tells me that maybe we don't know something about one of these two teams. And part of that is that, North Carolina is probably playing two quarterbacks. Minnesota isn't exactly sharing what their plan is going to be. And that's part of being in college football, but also makes this game really intriguing. I'm very, very intrigued about how this game plays out. And I think that we could be in store for a back and forth battle. Now, North Carolina leads the series 1-0. They obviously won the game last year. And that is something that Minnesota obviously remembers from the 2023 season. They obviously know what has happened since then. They know who's coming back, who's not. And that leads us to a question of who replaces Drake May. Now, you bring in Max Johnson from Texas A&M, the former LSU and Texas A&M transfer, has an opportunity to become the starting quarterback. They're also going to play Connor Harrell. Now, Max Johnson is more of that prototypical passer. Harrell is more of a runner. So we'll see two different offenses when each of them are in. And that's really going to be fun to watch. We're going to see which offense is going to be better. And I think that when you look at what Connor Harrell did last year, you saw some really good things when he was playing and when Drake May was out. I think that you see some potential in him. And Max Johnson definitely can throw the ball too. I just don't know if long term, if it's smart to play Max Johnson unless he is clearly the better guy. But we're going to find out. We will find out in week one. We're not going to find out maybe the permanent starter, but we are going to find out which one of these quarterbacks has more promise for the future of North Carolina football this year and in the future as well. Do they have any magic left for the Gophers? Is this a program that 2019 was the peak and you're just going to post your way to 6, maybe 7 wins a year? That is probably the biggest question. This is a schedule that is a little bit more difficult than maybe you would have liked for the Gophers. And this first game is definitely not going to do them any favors because of how talented North Carolina is. But at the same time, PJ Fleck has built a culture of embracing that underdog role, embracing life as an overlooked team, especially in this new Big Ten where you're bringing in other teams that are going to compete for conference championships. And maybe Minnesota's just not in that conversation unless they have the right schedule. So, do they have any magic left to pull off some upsets? We've seen them pull off upsets in the past, but do they have it with this team? There's definitely plenty of questions. And one of the things that we're intrigued to see is some of those X factor positions, quarterback being one of them. How do they step up and how do they impact this game? Now, one of the things that is going to be fun to watch, the matchup to watch really, is going to be North Carolina's defensive line versus Minnesota's offensive line. Now, Minnesota doesn't have a ton of elite talent that everybody knows, but their offensive line could be one of the better offensive lines in the Big Ten, maybe even in college football. Ariante Ursary is one of the best tackles in the entire country. He could be a potential first round pick when it's all said and done, and he is very fun to watch. Opposite of him, you're going to be facing a really good North Carolina defensive line. Kamon Rucker was super disruptive in week 1 last year against South Carolina, had a monster game against the Gamecocks, and could have the same against Minnesota if they're not careful. But there are other players to keep an eye on there too, and it's going to be fun to see which one of those groups prevails because Minnesota still wants to run the football. You obviously want to get better at throwing, but you want to establish the run. So that's going to be something that helps this team is establishing the run because that means they're winning the line of scrimmage. They are moving the football efficiently, and that's helping guys like Darius Taylor. Now, Darius Taylor is an absolute stud, absolutely phenomenal talent, and he's going to be fun to watch play on Sundays when he decides that he's ready to go to the NFL. And he is going to give this North Carolina defense something to think about. And that's one of the things that this North Carolina team has to worry about. What is Darius Taylor going to do? How can he impact the game? And how is Minnesota planning on utilizing him? He is someone, when healthy, can be a very dynamic runner. He also adds a pass catching element as well. So they're going to find ways to get him involved. They're going to find ways to get him the football. And it's going to be fun to see what Minnesota has in store for this team. We talked about Max Brosmer before. We're going to see what he can do with this offense. This is someone who, threw a lot of shorter passes at New Hampshire. Obviously, had some pretty good numbers and has, I think, some talent to make things interesting if you're Minnesota getting certain players open. I think that you have plenty of intrigue. Guys like Daniel Jackson are going to be really fun to watch. Jackson is a really good route runner. We saw that last year against Nebraska in that first game, had that absolute nasty double move that he made for a touchdown to put Minnesota ahead. And North Carolina knows that he is a dangerous threat. And they have a secondary that's going to be fun to watch. We'll see what they can do to slow him down. You bring in some other talent, either back from last year, but also you bring in a guy like Tyler Williams, who could be really fun to watch, the Georgia transfer. He is someone that could make a big impact. Somebody is going to have to step up besides Daniel Jackson. And Jackson right now is kind of dealing with some injury issue, I guess. And we'll see what he is going to do for this team. But if he is healthy, he is someone who has a lot of potential to break out and have a big game if Brosmer and him can find some chemistry. The defense is going to have their hands full. The secondary is going to be tested quite a bit. Now, this is a secondary that a lot of people are questioning coming into this year. Jack Henderson's going to be a leader of that group. He's a dynamic player on the defense side of the ball, and he is someone who can have a profound impact for this Minnesota defense. He is someone who can play deep. He can play near the line of scrimmage. He is a high energy guy that fits what Fleck wants to do, and he is really fun to watch. Same with Justin Wally. Wally is one of those guys that's really fun to watch when he's playing at a big level, an elite level, and he has the capability to play at the next level in the NFL. It's just a matter of can he put together those games that you see, oh, this is the film we want to see. He is going to face some really talented receivers from North Carolina, and that's a North Carolina passing attack that wants to get the ball down the field and get the ball down the field in a hurry. We will see what he's capable of doing. Obviously, they're going to have to stop the run with the running back that North Carolina possesses, but stopping the pass will also be a challenge for Minnesota. Now, on the North Carolina side of things, Omarion Hampton is that running back, an absolute dominant player when they want him to be good for them. He is someone who can deliver when they need someone to make a play. 1,500 yards last year, 15 touchdowns, 6 feet, 220 pounds, a really, really good player in between the tackles, can make some big plays. And it's just going to come down to what can the guy next to him in the backfield do for him, whether that's Max Johnson, whether that's Connor Harrell. We've talked about both of them. We know what they're capable of doing. We know what this offense probably will look like when both of them are in. And it's just a matter of, again, who's more consistent, who moves the ball down the field more efficiently, and who puts points on the scoreboard. We may not find the answer to this quarterback battle quite yet, but we are going to see some really interesting things that will help us move along towards the end of that debate. On the defensive side of the ball, we talked about Kamon Rucker again, a big year for him, a career year in 2023. Howard Eccles also returns behind him. The linebacker position has a new face next to Power Eccles, so we'll see what they can do. But this is a defense that is going to be tough to block. They're going to be tough to move the football on if you're Minnesota, and that's going to make things really interesting. No prediction for this. We have a prediction video coming out later this week. But North Carolina feels like they have plenty of talent to win this game, which is why it's surprising that Minnesota is listed as favorite as of right now. But this is going to be one of the more interesting games in week one, and maybe still, again, like last year, kind of flies under the radar. If the Gophers have it in them to pull off an upset, that makes things very different for them in 2024. And if North Carolina can get off to a good start here with a win, that makes their outlook more positive than obviously if they lose this game to Minnesota.